So let's go ahead and include a font now. So I'm going to head over to my favorite third-party font service, which is google.com/fonts. There are many font services like this one, but I like Google the best because it's completely free. All of the fonts are legitimate and properly licensed. The hosting is extremely fast and reliable, and lately, their selection has become very broad. I already know which fonts I'm going to use, but you can go ahead and browse through the selection here and use the filters over on the left-hand side to choose a font that you like best. So I'm going to go ahead and type in Changa 1, I believe is how you pronounce that. And I'm going to click Add to Collection. And then there's another font that I want called Open Sans. So I'm going to type that in, and here we have Open Sans, and I'm going to add that to my collection as well. With both fonts chosen, I'm ready to use them in my site. So I'll click this button down at the bottom that says Use. Now, I may want to use some variations of these fonts, so I'm going to grab a few by checking these boxes. So I want normal, 400, and italic there, and then 700 for bold, and 700 for bold and italic as well. And let's see here. I also want to get extra bold 800. Great. Now let's scroll down to the box that says add this code to your website and copy the link element that you see here. So let's go ahead and highlight this, copy it, and then we'll go back to our code. And we want to go to our index file here. And you may have noticed that the code we're copying looks very similar to the link elements that we've created ourselves. That's because Google is actually giving us a CSS file here that includes our fonts. Now, it's very important that this CSS file gets pasted in just below your normalize, but just above your main. So again, you want your fonts to come in below normalize.css, but above your custom CSS. That's because we're going to be referring to our fonts inside of our custom CSS, and if we put it below our custom CSS, it won't know what we're talking about. So let's save that and then go into main.css and actually apply one of our fonts to the first level headline using the font family property. So inside of our heading here, let's skip down a little bit and select an H1. And then let's say font family. And we need to use single quotes and say Changa 1 for the name of the font. And then we'll put a comma and follow that up with sans dash serif and end it with a semicolon. So let's go over this syntax again. You'll notice that we put the name of our font in single quotes, and it's important that we use the exact name of our font. And in fact, Google tells you exactly how to do that here. And it's suggesting we use cursive. We're actually just going to use sans serif as our fallback. So let's take a look at that again. After the font is in quotes, we have a comma, and we follow it up with sans dash serif without the quotes. We're adding this so that in the unlikely event of Google Fonts going down or this font no longer being available, the font will fall back to the generic sans serif font and it will still look decent. Now, let's save our CSS file if you haven't already done so and refresh to see what this looks like. As you can see, I now have this font being applied to my first level headline. While we're working on this H1, let's set a font size and add the rest of our styling to it. So I'm going to skip down here and set a margin of 15 pixels and then 0 pixels, so 15 on the top and bottom, and 0 on the left and right, and then a font size of 1.75 ems. Let's explain the easy part here first. Like I said, the margin has spacing above and below the element, but I don't want any on the left and right, so I've left that blank. Then I've set a font size of 1.75 ems. This is a new unit that we haven't encountered before, and it may look a little bit confusing at first, but we're going to use it frequently, so we'd better understand it. Ems are a relative unit of measurement, and they get their name from the capital letter M, or the size of the letter M. Strange, I know. Pixels are probably a slightly more familiar unit if you're used to sizing fonts in Photoshop or a word processor and other similar tools. 1em is equivalent to the current font size, which in most browsers is set to 16 pixels by default. So we're basically adjusting the font size relative to 16 pixels. That means that 1em is the font size, 16 pixels by default. In this case, we've set a first-level headline to the size of 1.75, which is 0.75 larger relative to the default size. So it's basically a multiplier. Let's save this and refresh the page to see what that looks like. As you can see, we've set it to a slightly smaller font size in this case, because actually the default size for a headline is larger by default. There are many reasons to use a relative unit like ems instead of an absolute unit like pixels, but in summary, they're just better suited to the cascading nature of CSS. It's much easier to make fast and powerful changes with a relative unit of measurement rather than setting it with pixels and being very explicit. If that doesn't make much sense, don't worry about it right now. We're going to use this much more in the rest of this project, and you'll see many more examples, and it should start to make sense over time.